Good afternoon, everyone. Art Alvarez at MortgageWorks, where we have the answers and they're on the house. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute. Glad to be back live. The last couple of weeks, as you may know, we had to do a recorded show because of I had some commitments outside of my office and being able to do the show live. So I'm glad to be back. Here we are in the greater Coachella Valley, Palm Springs area. Weather's great, warm but not hot. Of course, a little less crowded now that we're past the official season here in the desert, but that's kind of blurred these days. We get a lot of folks visiting here in Palm Springs, Coachella Valley, even going into the hotter months of the summertime. So we're really becoming more of a year-round destination. So with that, I want to go ahead and jump right into our program today. We've got a pretty good discussion topic that Jeff and I will be covering a little bit later. First, we're going to go ahead and give you an update on the mortgage rates and bond market. As you know, we like to pull up our rate grid right from our website. We post these rates daily to give you, again, I call it a pricing or rate indications. Your actual rate may vary depending on your specific situation and loan parameters, but this rate grid gives you a very good indicator of the level of rates in general. And despite all the turmoil, all the financial anxiety with recent events and tariffs and where's inflation at and the unemployment numbers and so forth, rates are hanging in there. It's getting to be kind of a broken record, I keep saying, but we're still solidly in the sixes. Things have maintained a pretty level, stable level, more or less, a pretty narrow range, low to high sixes. And so you can see that on our rate grid. We're still at about 6 5/8 for 30-year fixed conforming. Same with the 2-1 and 3-2-1 buy downs. FHA VA slightly over 6 at about 6.125. So again, all in all, not bad, and actually pretty good considering all of the, again, anxiety and volatility and turmoil that we've seen in the financial markets. And actually, we had a pretty good day in the bond market today. The 10-year bond yield that we're going to pull up here, which is a 5-day chart. This goes from last Friday to today. And you can see, of course, last Friday we had pretty nice bond yields. It kind of started climbing, this week, and got over 450 yesterday, and then we had that nice drop today, back to the mid 445 range. So doesn't fit Jeff's belief that we usually see a dip on Wednesday. Today it's Thursday. Well, actually, I guess we had a little, not really a dip on Wednesday, but we're back to Wednesday's level after going up late Wednesday into early this morning. So want to go ahead and cover a few things in terms of the economic data points and news this week that kind of underscores where the bond yields are at and therefore mortgage rates. And there's a few things. Of course, what continues to dominate the financial markets is a few things. One thing I will tell you is the tariffs certainly continue to be a factor. I call it tariff tribulations, are upsetting or have been upsetting the financial markets. Of course, the good news is if you've been paying attention to the stock market, it's come back pretty nicely. It's not back to the level it was at before the tariff talk started, but it certainly has recovered quite a bit. And I think that's provided some optimism for folks that were getting pretty concerned about where things were going. The first thing I want to mention, and you see an acronym there, NFIB, that's the National Federation of Independent Business. They do a survey, Small Business Optimism Survey, and they did announce that for the second month in a row, that index of optimism had dropped. The 51-year average is 98, and for the second month in a row, it's been right around 96. So the indicator there is small businesses are getting a little nervous, obviously. A lot of concern about these tariffs and whatever does ultimately play out, how that's going to affect their business. So there's definitely some anxiety with small business owners. CPI, this week is inflation week. CPI came out on Tuesday. It was cooler than expected. But here's what's interesting. Unlike what we would normally see when we see a good inflation number, again, consumer price index came in cooler than expected on a year-over-year basis, 2.3, not much higher than the Fed target of 2.0. You would have thought we would have seen a bond rally. Didn't happen. Bond yields from Tuesday, and we saw on the chart earlier here, going into Wednesday, actually bond yields got worse, not better, despite the cooler CPI number. That usually doesn't happen. And of course, you can see their smallest increase in the CPI since 2021. So you would think that's pretty good news, and it is good news. But yet, what's happening here is the actual data that gets released is not carrying as much weight as the anticipated inflation numbers that may occur in the future based on the outcome of this whole tariff strategy. Today we had PPI, producer price index, and retail sales. Both were forecast to be, well, PPI was forecast to be slightly lower, and actually it did come in slightly lower. It came out today, and a slight increase, or I'm sorry, a decline, 0.50 in April. That's significant. Year over year, PPI is at 2.4. Again, only slightly above the Fed target of 2.0. Retail sales did go up, but only slightly. But nonetheless, that still indicates that despite all this turmoil, all this anxiety, retail sales, which are very important because it's about 2/3 of our economy, are hanging in there pretty well. They were back, it was cut back from the previous month, but still slightly up. So that's a good thing. And then Fed Chairman Powell did speak this morning, and his comments can always move the markets. And I think overall, his comments weren't too negative, if you will, in terms of affecting the market. Again, you saw on the chart, the bond yields got better today. He's still talking about I wrote it down, more frequent supply shocks and more volatile inflation. And again, he's pointing to this tariff strategy that our current administration is pursuing is going to create those kinds of potential issues in the economy and in the financial markets. So despite that somewhat negative sentiment, like, hey, things are going to get a little dicey here, the markets accepted that pretty well, and we didn't see a jump in the bond yields that we often see when he talks. So I consider that a pretty good outcome. So I was kind of bracing for the 10-year yield might be going up if he was being too negative. And that's pretty much for the week. We're going to go ahead with the last item on the chart here is on the slide is tomorrow, housing starts, building permits, and consumer sentiment. Housing starts are actually forecast to be slightly higher, building permits slightly lower, and consumer sentiment is actually forecast to be slightly better, which would be interesting, again, given all the turmoil. Those items on Friday don't usually move the markets a whole lot. So I would expect that the bond yield currently, if it stays in that 445 range, hopefully I would expect it shouldn't be any worse tomorrow, and maybe we'll get a few ticks better ending the week and going into next week. So that's your update on the mortgage and bond markets. And with that, we're going to go ahead and bring Jeff back because we're going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of buying property with cash. And
hey, Art.
Home may be a bad idea. Hey, Jeff.
How you doing?
Doing all right. How are you?
Good. I'm an investor in training. I'm preparing for winter, so I know it's 90 degrees outside today, but it could get cold, so I'm preparing for it.
Okay.
Yeah, baking in the future.
Okay.
I'm taking off because it's hot. It's just stop me if I'm wrong, but I know it's okay to prepare for the future, but it seems like this anticipation that everybody has, the Fed chair and that whatnot, is they bake in bad news that hasn't even happened yet. And I've noticed a lot of people are now retracting the 70% chance we're going to have a recession, and the inflation is going to go through the roof, and but it hasn't happened.
Well, that's true, and this is a good example of how, and it's why we put on our initial slide about the bond and stock markets, where we talk about how financial markets react to stimuli with their reptilian minds. See, the psychology of the markets can shift a little bit. You think it's completely rational and logical and all that, but there can be a very strong psychological aspect to the market. And so what we're seeing now is some of these data points are coming out, CPI, PPI, and retail sales and so forth. And that's hard, real data. Now it's looking back, but not far back. I mean, CPI and PPI released today is from April, so it's pretty recent data. And yet it didn't really help this week, a whole lot with the bond yields, because now the focus has shifted from the actual released data, which can move the market, to, it's in the yeah, but it's a yeah, but situation. Like, okay, CPI cooler than normal, PPI cooler than normal. Yeah, but we're worried that it's going to get worse because of the current administration. I won't name our president, but we all know who he is, and these crazy tariffs, and it's going to be bad for us all in the future. We just know it's coming, and so we're just going to plan for the worst. And I that can be a little bit frustrating, because you can't ignore the data, and the data just doesn't support yet these doomsday predictions. Now the comeback to that's going to be, well, but the tariffs haven't been fully implemented yet, and we don't even know quite yet what those tariffs are going to be. It's kind of moving around, right? This week's 90-day delay with China in terms of tariffs and so forth. So yeah, that's part of the trickiness of kind of watching the markets, is understanding the psychology and where the pressure points are and what the focus is from week to week and month to month.
Well, I've been to your office, and I've noticed there's no Ouija board, and there is no what's that little ball, to see the future. I mean, you deal with
no
facts, right? No crystal ball to see the future.
Yeah, I mean, for me anyway, all I can rely on is the data as it comes out. Now, you can, with some of this data, you can make predictions. Of course, there's pros who do this all day for a living, and then based on the current data, you do still want to forecast what changes could occur in the financial markets, oftentimes as it relates to policy decisions by our federal government and so forth. And certainly those are a factor, but I don't think you should do that at the expense of ignoring the current data. And the current data is reasonably good. I mean, inflation continues to be under control and trending down. Retail sales, continue to be pretty strong, and the labor markets, employment numbers are still pretty good. So you put all that together, you're right. I'm hearing, just maybe a month ago, recession talk was back in a big way. Now it seems to be kind of coming off the table again. So you just got to be able to kind of flow with these, back and forth and turns in terms of what everybody's thinking. So,
well, you talk about data, and I won't get too deep into this, but you think if you're Boeing today or GE, you're pretty happy with so far with the president's trip abroad and what it's done to their business, which I would think would result in more jobs. Because if you're going to build that many planes and produce that many engines, you better have staff on duty.
Exactly right. Plus, of course, what was the number I saw that the Saudis are going to buy 160 to 200 planes from Boeing?
That's a lot.
That's a heck of a lot. And that's going to mean, if it happens, and I didn't read anything to lead me to believe it won't, that's a lot more jobs. And boy, I mean, Boeing's had its issues over the last few years, right? That kind of news, man, buy a few bucks laying around, I'd be maybe buying some Boeing stock. I think that's a pretty good long-term play. It takes a couple of years, I'm sure, to build that many planes, probably more than a couple of years, but that's pretty good news.
Yeah, I like that. Well, let's talk about something that I remember one time I went in to buy a car, and I intended on paying cash. This was a long time ago when cars weren't, price of a house back then.
Right.
And I went in to pay cash, and by the time I got done, I ended up financing it because the individual in the finance department explained how my money was so much better if I didn't do that. So I'm going to kind of put you into that hot seat today of saying, hey, why paying cash for your home may be and I have in parentheses, a really bad idea. And so if you're open to this, I'd love to share that with you.
Yeah, I'd love to, especially given where I'm located in this market. This is a very pertinent subject, which I'll comment on in a minute. So,
well, I joke, or I laugh when somebody that we both know very well, and she's a real estate agent, and she talks about how, her percentage of people who buy homes, and she does I was not shocked, but I was surprised on how many homes she sells in a year when you give the average for a real estate agent. And then you ask her, well, how many paid cash? And it was shocking. I won't let that cat out of the bag. I'll let you talk about it, but it was amazing. And I think if they knew some of the things that I want to ask you about, depending on what you say, that they might have had a different thought.
Right. Yeah, you're right about that. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it, and then I'll make some comments about it.
So the first one is when it's like, hey, if I gave, and let's think, the average price of a home in the Coachella Valley is what?
Uh, the median price of a home in Coachella Valley is in the 600s.
So if I pull out $600,000, wherever that is, and I put it out, it seems like I am tying that money up. I'm losing liquidity. Can you talk to me about what the advantages or disadvantages of that would be?
Well, exactly right. And by the way, just as a point of backdrop for our viewers and listeners, here in the Coachella Valley, the portion of sales that are cash is incredibly high. I've heard different uh, numbers predicted of 50 to 65% of transactions are cash. And the other thing I'm reminded of in talking about this is there was a gentleman here in the Valley for many years. He was a mortgage originator like me, and uh, very well regarded, very successful. I didn't know him well, but it seemed like a nice guy, very popular, and so forth. He unfortunately passed away much too young. But when I would see him at meetings, like at the Realtor Caravan meetings and so forth, he developed a saying that he kind of became famous for, which was when he would get up to speak as a loan originator, he would tell the realtors, just say no to cash. And everybody thought it was funny, but as a mortgage originator, we kind of have that sentiment. It's like, we don't get paid, and we're on the sideline if it's a real estate transaction where the buyer's paying cash. So we obviously don't like to see that. And so, yeah, I think this topic is pertinent to at least give people that perspective of why that may not be the best idea. So, yeah, the very, very first point you have on there is losing liquidity. That is a real concern, I think, or at least should be for some of these cash buyers. Now, it depends on where they are, maybe in the age spectrum. If they're a baby boomer buyer, then they may be looking at going with cash when they acquire that home, because it could be that their recurring monthly income is not that significant, and they're concerned about being able to manage a mortgage expense. And even if they keep much of their cash in order to use it for other purposes, so that is a concern that they have. But the problem with that, I think, is you could end up, as that bullet point suggests, you can put yourself in a very kind of shaky position in terms of liquidity. Because if you're a baby boomer age home buyer, and you're going to use up most of your cash to buy that home because you want a mortgage free home because you're on Social Security or other, maybe a small pension, what have you, you're feeling like income is limited, so you want to minimize your housing expense. Well, the problem with that is, what if you run into a financial emergency? You don't have that opportunity to grab cash quickly. And so you're ending up putting all of your assets, most of your, as it says there, most of your liquidity is gone, because you've put it all into this fixed asset where you can't easily convert that equity to cash. So that is definitely a risk factor, I think maybe a lot of cash buyers don't take into account. Now, you could argue, maybe you're a high income millennial buyer, and maybe you're high net worth as well, and you have lots of cash, then you could still maybe make an argument paying cash is better. But I think that's very much dependent on how much your monthly income is, and that's going to continue after acquire that home, and what do you have in terms of other liquidity. If you have substantial liquidity and you're still earning at a substantial level, that might support buying cash better than not. But I would say, even in that case, that kind of buyer is probably not understanding that they are losing a substantial amount of equity by paying cash. And it's a risky approach to take, I think. So,
well, this next one I think is one that I think when I was buying a car that was convincing to me. Now, this was a long time ago, and interest rates on the car, were like around, I don't know, 10%. And the money that I took out of interest bearing, I don't get crazy, but it was like 13%. So it's one of those things I'm thinking, if I had $600,000 and I'm going to put it into a home, versus are there other investments that I might actually lose out on, Art?
well, that's absolutely true. Now, because that's the point. Potential investment gain. See, this is the concept of, don't take that 600,000, just put it against the house. You're mortgage free, without considering what are your alternative uses of that money. And now, some would argue, well, rates are up. Rates are crazy high. Well, we already talked about how mortgage rates historically are actually affordable right now. They're well below the 50-year average, or actually more than that. So then the concern is, well, if a mortgage rate's 6.5, am I, the homeowner who paid cash is going to say, well, if I'm going to pay 6.5% for my mortgage, that's too high. I'm better off paying cash. But what you're forgetting is, what is the opportunity to take that money and put it to work elsewhere? Can you achieve a return greater than your mortgage expense by getting the mortgage and preserving much of that liquidity? Now, some would argue, well, 6.5% is pretty high. I don't think I can get better yield with my money putting it elsewhere. Now, I would argue folks thinking that way are probably thinking very simply, like a savings account, or a 90-day or a 6-month or maybe a 1-year CD. If that's the way you're thinking about potential investment opportunities and gains, you're probably right. Putting all that money in CDs at 5% or 6%, and the mortgage is costing 6.5%, well, there's no positive spread there, right? But I think that's a sort of a narrow view of potential investment gain opportunity. Any good financial advisor, folks who are professionals who are in that business, I think would love an opportunity to meet with a homeowner who is otherwise thinking, I'm going to lay 600 grand down on this house so it's free and clear. I think any good financial advisor would look at that situation and say, well, wait a minute, can I at least show you what can be done with a good chunk of that money? Go ahead and get a small mortgage, or even a 50% of value, something, so you're freeing up some of that cash, and let me show you how I can help you invest that money safely and in financial investments that are going to be relatively stable, and yet still achieve a gain, an investment gain that's going to exceed that mortgage rate. And to me, that proposition is very much worth looking into, and not just brushing it off as, oh, it's not really possible, or the spread might, they might think, well, if my mortgage is going to cost me 6.5, and a financial advisor can assure me that I can get 8.5 on my investments if I take that money elsewhere, that's only 2% spread. Oh, well, so what? Well, wait a minute. 2% spread on, what could be 400, 500,000. That's real money after a year or so, right?
Yes, it is compounding.
So to me, the point that gets missed is that buyer who doesn't pause and say, well, wait a minute, let me make sure using all of this cash toward the home is really the best financial approach, or should I split that money up into essentially what are going to be multiple investments?
What about that person who says, yeah, but Art, if I pay cash for my house, the value of my home keeps going up. Well, again, comparing that against if I put it in something, an investment vehicle outside of real estate, is it greater or less than what the average is as far as home values grow? Like, you've talked about that in the past, of what the anticipated growth has been and what it's going to, forecasting what it's going to be. Is it realistic to get 8, 9, 10% on the growth of our home?
No, I would say historically speaking, and I think in the last couple of years, have underscored this. Um, you know, and in fact, I'll also point out, for example, on reverse mortgages, when we're arranging those and the disclosure packages that are presented to homeowners for a reverse mortgage, the standard appreciation rate used in those documents is a 4% annual appreciation rate. That is a pretty good historical average for home price appreciation. So that again goes into this potential investment gain opportunity. Are you really serving yourself the best by taking 600 grand and investing it into a fixed asset that likely on average historically is only going to go up by 4% annually? Again, a good financial advisor would probably jump all over that and say, wait a minute, yeah, financial investments of other sorts can be risky, but there's a lot of stuff out there that is pretty safe, pretty stable, and very likely could achieve much better than a 4% appreciation rate. So then what you conclude is, well, why wouldn't you split up that money you have available between, yeah, I'll still put some, a down payment onto that home that's going to appreciate at 4%. So I am gaining some investment gain on my down payment funds, but I'll take the rest of those funds, apply them elsewhere. Chances are I'm going to achieve better than 4%. So that overall, from a wealth building standpoint, you're achieving greater results by diversifying that money into multiple fixed asset like a home, financial instruments over here. Between the two, you're probably going to be much better off in the long term in terms of your investment gains and in building your wealth.
Seems like a no-brainer, Art. The next one I want to talk about is tax advantages. It says we lose tax advantage. Talk to us about what the benefits are if I decide to take that, and whether you said 50% or I finance the whole thing. Tell me about that.
Well, that's an interesting topic because, of course, some would argue in the last few years, the tax advantage of getting a mortgage has been somewhat diminished by, for example, the SALT. Well, not the SALT because that's state and local taxes, but mortgage interest deduction. There's been work underway at times to try to reduce that or what have you. But it's an important benefit of getting the mortgage that is not, I think, fully appreciated. Because when you get a mortgage, and we're talking here primarily about primary homes or maybe a second home, that mortgage interest is going to be deductible. You're going to be able to declare it as part of your deductions when you file your return. And then, of course, what you have to look at, well, what's your tax bracket? Well, if you're getting, again, a 6.5% mortgage and you're in a 30% tax bracket, let's say you're earning pretty high income, well, what's your net after tax cost for that mortgage? It's not 6.5. It's probably about 70% of that, which means your net after tax cost of that interest on that mortgage is probably more like 4.5%, not 6.5%. Well, then you go, well, wait a minute. If that's true, that underscores even more. Why wouldn't I free up some of that money? Yeah, put a down payment, but take the rest of it that it would have gone toward a cash purchase, move that elsewhere, put it into other potential investment vehicles where the gain that I have to achieve to get a positive spread is no longer 4.5. It's more like, or 6.5. It's more like 4.5. You got a greater spread opportunity there because you don't necessarily need to have your alternative investment vehicle earn 8 or 10%. You can earn 6, 7, 7.5 and still do very well because now you're taking into account your net after tax cost of that mortgage, taking into account the mortgage interest deduction.
Well, it's one of those things that I remember a long time ago. It said, the key to building wealth is not making money. It's making your money make money.
Right.
And it sounds like all these things are a way to continue to either preserve and build wealth, preserve your wealth or continue to build your wealth. Is that fair to say?
I think so, very much so. And see, I think part of the psychology here is those who like the idea of paying cash are going to say, well, wait a minute, the financial markets are too risky. I don't want to, you're telling me about, I can put this money elsewhere and earn 7.5%. My mortgage, after mortgage interest expense deduction, is really net costing me not the 6.5 note rate, but 4.5. So yeah, it looks like I could get a 3% spread there. Well, financial markets are too risky. The stock market goes up and down. It can correct by 20%. So that's too much of a possibility for me to be comfortable pursuing it. Well, that can work both ways. We all remember 2008, right? So imagine you're investing all of your money into the property. You're not taking some of it into other potential investment gains. You have less liquidity and you've put it all into this one asset. Well, as we know, real estate values at times can drop, just like the stock market. Now, of course, we did talk, recently that only 7 times in the last 75 years has home prices dropped, for the entire year, but it does happen. And so I would argue that risk, that potential risk, can be pointed to as valid both with homes as well as financial instruments. And so I don't think that alone should be a reason not to consider this.
This next one is, I think, is quite interesting because you risk overcommitting in a single asset.
Right. Well, again, we've kind of touched on that already. It's like a lot of times these cash purchases are certainly in this market out here. Again, it tends to be baby boomer buyers. They've sold a property elsewhere, where their property values are higher, maybe LA, Orange County, San Francisco Bay Area, other states, Seattle, et cetera. And so folks, in some cases they'll buy, sell a $3 million home, and then they come out here to the Coachella Valley and they can buy something for cash for $1 million, and then, go ahead and take that money and put the rest in the bank. But still, I think that the problem with that is you're leaving some money on the table that you could diversify and put elsewhere. Or in another situation, more common, where you're selling another property and you're not going to have a lot of money left over. You're going to take all of those proceeds and put it on that next house. So you've got, this asset free and clear. That's great, but you don't have a whole lot of money in the bank left over. And so again, your total investment strategy is a one asset strategy. And then on top of that, it's a fixed asset, real estate, not a liquid asset. So it kind of narrows your options if you encounter a difficult financial situation. So I just think and again, if you have all your money in a single asset like a home with an average appreciation rate of 4%, even if you're not a baby boomer age, you're younger, well, boy, you don't have a lot of money applied elsewhere working on building that wealth. It's all in one asset, that home. And a 4% appreciation rate, that's good, but it's certainly nothing to brag about. And you can make a pretty good argument that if you're talking about selling another property and all of your proceeds toward another purchase, and whether it's 600 or 800 or $1 million, I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of money to invest in one single asset at a relatively modest historical appreciation rate. Why wouldn't you consider doing better with all that money and spread it around? I think that's really what you have to consider, because otherwise I think there's too much risk in a single asset investment, like a cash purchase of a home, leaving no other money left for an emergency. I think that's a risky proposition.
Well, I want to kind of shift gears just a little bit here, because here in the Coachella Valley, as you mentioned before, a lot of baby boomers. We have people that are saying, hey, they're near or they're at retirement. And so, as you say, that may be one of those reasons where they say, hey, I want to pay cash because I want to take my overall monthly expenses down and really lower my risk. But there's a better way to do this, isn't there? I mean, there are other options that they can do. Said, hey, it's like, I remember one time they said, if you borrow money and then you buy something with it that is giving you a return, your return isn't that 6 or 8%. It's infinite because you're using borrowed money. Is there a way to kind of, and I'm not saying, somebody should risk their home by investing in something else, but is there a better way to do this, Art?
Well, I think so. What you're getting at is the idea that, if you're going to buy a home for 600 for cash, um, at a 4% appreciation rate, what's your return on investment? Well, 600,000 value, that's the price of the home, 4% first year. What's the increase in the value? Well, it's about what, 24,000. Well, what's your return on your 600,000 investment? Well, do the math. 24,000 divided by 600. It's not a whole lot, right? Then there's a concept of using other people's money to create leverage to increase your investment return. So you could buy that $600,000 house, put 120,000 down, 20%, let's say. It goes up 4% a year. Well, and that's still 24,000. But now, really, your return is 24,000 as to the 120,000 you invested. So your return on investment is better because you've earned a return on your cash investment that in dollars is the same whether you paid cash or got a 80% loan, but your return is leveraged higher because you're getting the same amount of return, 24 grand at the end of the year, but only based on 120 outlay, not 600 outlay. So that drastically improves your rate of return by applying that money elsewhere and putting less money into the home. You got to take advantage of the leverage to help build the wealth more rapidly.
Well, let's say now, let's use an example. Somebody moves down here from Seattle, and they do have a lump of cash, and they decide they're going to buy their house and they're going to pay cash for it, but then they're concerned about their retirement, and they're over the age of 65. Are there options for these people that really is better than just paying cash for a home?
Well, absolutely. And there's two ways they can approach it, especially if they're at that age. I mean, obviously, one thing they can do is, they're moving to this market. They sold a home elsewhere. They are kind of entering their retirement years. They want to maintain, or they want to reduce their household expenses, including their housing expense. So they think to themselves that they want to go ahead and pay cash. The problem is it could, use up most of their liquidity. And so then you've got the concern of, actually a variety of concerns. You're going into retirement years. Your income's probably going to be at a lower level. You have to be concerned about potential, health expenses, and things like that could come into play where suddenly you need to have more liquidity. A lot of times we'll get folks in that circumstance who will, call us and want to pull some equity out. But of course, the initial and more common thinking is, I want to get a HELOC. And, the HELOC product has changed a fair amount lately. And a lot of folks in the kind of situation you're describing will say, well, I want to get a HELOC and I don't necessarily need the money right now, but I want to get it and put it in place so if I need money later. So it's a rational thing to think, right? I just bought my home free and clear, but I do want to have access to that equity quickly if I need it. So I want to get a HELOC. Well, the problem with that is a couple of things. Number one is they're not actually that easy to qualify for. You have to meet some pretty specific parameters in terms of debt ratios, credit scores in particular. You have to be pretty high on your credit scores and so forth. And then the other thing is the lending side. The lending community has figured out I want to get a HELOC for a rainy day fund strategy by a homeowner. And this is something that we used to do all the time, and lenders figured out it's not to their advantage. What I mean is, not too many years ago, I could have a client say, I just bought my house, I want to get a HELOC. What do you need it for? Well, I don't need it for anything. I just want to get it so that if I need access to money later, I can grab it sooner or quickly. So we would arrange the loan. And back then, we didn't have to even take a draw at closing. They could just get the loan, the line of credit, and it'll close with no balance. And then it just sits there. Problem with that is the lending community figured out that's a loser for them. They don't make any money after incurring the costs on their side in terms of underwriting and loan closing and all the staff and overhead involved in making that happen. They aren't getting a return because that loan once made is sitting there with no balance. There's no return to the lender. So now what's happened is, if you want to get a HELOC, you're forced to take a substantial draw at closing, In fact, in most cases, a majority of the credit line amount. And then you're stuck with, well, I don't need the money. So then you're forced to send it back over the first few months of payments. And that can be pretty tricky. Plus the fact that a lot of these HELOCs now don't have the 10-year draw period that they used to have. You can only draw them for 3 years instead of 10. So your window to draw on it later as a rainy day fund is much shorter with a lot of these HELOCs. So the obvious alternative is get or consider a reverse mortgage. And what I mean by that is a reverse mortgage, unlike a traditional HELOC, its line of credit, because a reverse mortgage can include, and I would argue the best way to access your equity with a reverse mortgage is set up a line of credit. Well, unlike a traditional HELOC, a reverse mortgage line of credit, a couple things about it. One is after you close the loan and you pay any mandatory obligations with the reverse mortgage, like if there is an existing mortgage, or even if not, just covering the closing costs and maybe you've got upcoming property tax installment or homeowner's insurance renewal. After covering those mandatory obligations to close the loan, you can set up, if you don't need any more of that money available, you can set up all the rest as a line of credit. And it can sit there unused and the lender's okay with it. But even better, the biggest benefit of the line of credit with a reverse mortgage is it grows over time. And that growth of the line of the unpaid balance of the line of credit, that growth rate is tied to the interest rate on the loan. Now,
wait a minute. So what you're saying is, if I take out, let's just say $100,000, but my total amount might be $200,000, that extra $100,000 could actually grow if I don't use it? Right.
When you get a reverse mortgage, and again, the most common one we originate are HECMs, Home Equity Conversion Mortgage, FHA product. When you apply for it, you do have to pay certain things at closing. And if you don't have an existing mortgage, it's pretty limited. It's closing costs and any property-related expenses that are coming up for renewal, like taxes or insurance. After you've covered those, and if you don't need any other money initially at closing, you can have the rest of the money set up as a line of credit. And the lender doesn't force you to take any of that line of credit available at closing. You can just set it up and leave it there. And then the additional benefit, unlike a traditional HELOC, is let's say you do that approach and you've got this $100,000 line of credit that's now in place and you don't need it. It's got a zero balance. Well, over time, that line of the credit limit, 100,000 limit, is going to go up. And the amount of increase is going to be tied to what the rate is on the loan. And right now, reverse mortgage is the most popular one. The rates on those is right around the mid sixes. So what you're going to be looking at is a line of credit over time, at least based on current rates, growing at about a 6% plus per year. So suddenly that 100,000 the first year, now the second year it's 106,000. And then the third year, it's going to be over 110, probably somewhere in the 113, 15 range, and so forth. So if you did get it as a rainy day fund, the additional benefit is no forcing you to start using it. It can sit there, and then it grows over time. So if you have you're going to have access to more money over time because it's growing based on the fact that it's not currently got any money owed on it. So that is a great benefit on the on the HECM reverse mortgage line of credits that you do not see on a traditional HELOC.
That seems like it's just a win-win. We're talking about the pros of that. Are there any cons to that, or is it really all upside?
I consider it basically to be all upside. And again, we've talked in past shows here about if you're the kind of this is an example of where a homeowner who thinks they don't need a reverse mortgage, they paid cash. We couldn't convince them to get a mortgage when they bought the house. They paid cash. But they're at reverse mortgage age level where they're eligible to get one, but they maybe still have good income. They may have good liquid assets elsewhere. But even so, in fact, some of those liquid assets may be an IRA account that they're pulling onto, money every month distributions to live on, especially if they're 70 plus, right? Required minimum distributions. Well, if you have a scenario where the stock market drops big time, like we saw here a couple months ago, that's a point in time where that line of credit that's been sitting over there, zero balance, growing over time. Well, you have a 20% stock market correction. So your IRA's been adversely affected that you've been pulling on to live on. Stop pulling the money out of that depressed IRA account because it's fully invested and the stock market's dropped 20%. Stop pulling from that account. Start pulling from that unused HELOC until the market improves. That way, you're not diminishing this IRA asset over here in a down market, because the last thing you want to do is keep pulling money out of it when the values drop that much. So that's when you take an advantage of that, line of credit in your reverse mortgage sitting there with a zero balance. Start drawing from that for your monthly income, and then once the stock market recovers, then switch back. Again, it's called sequence of return risk. That's the way you would manage it. Any homeowner ought to be talking to a financial advisor about that scenario, that strategy, and look at possibly setting up a reverse mortgage with that line of credit option, especially for that purpose.
That's something that someone would talk to you, because so this is somebody who did decide, if they're watching the show today, or a recorded version of this, and they own their home free and clear because they did pay cash, but they realize they're kind of cash poor because it's all tied up in their house. Can they call you for information and find out where they're at?
Right. That's exactly what, in fact, I'm talking to someone right now this week about that. So that's the thing, is that a homeowner in that situation, I think, should give us a call. Give me a call. I'll go over their current situation, give them some ideas about how they can access that equity and the best way to do it. We actually present them with a proposal package. It's very detailed, lots of graphs and charts and everything. I walk folks through that so they can understand better how this product can be used strategically as a financial strategy, not just as a loan of last resort where, your home's free and clear, you're retired, your income is diminished, it's limited, you've used up maybe most of all your other liquid assets, and then suddenly you go, oh my gosh, I need money and I'm going to do this reverse mortgage because now I suddenly need cash. I think folks wait too long and end up getting to that point when they should go back and look earlier, be proactively strategic about how a reverse mortgage can be part of your financial investment strategy. We can help homeowners with that so that they're, again, not just maintaining their wealth, but hopefully building it over time.
I think this is good. I think it's great using it as a tool instead of a last resort crutch, or
Right.
that last cord on your ripcord as you're coming down and the chutes aren't opening.
Right.
You can get a hold of Art at 760-969-5023, or as it says on the screen, Art at mwloan.com. Art, I appreciate it. Really unpacking this idea of maybe paying cash is not your best idea. And if you have paid cash for a home, there is I'm going to be a little punish. There is a golden parachute for you. That there's an opportunity for you. That give Art a call and find out what it is. Art, any last thoughts before I dip out of here?
Well, you know what I'm going to say. Just say no to cash.
Just say no to cash. That's going to be. I can see that bumper sticker now all over the Coachella Valley. Just say no to cash.
That's
Art,
right.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let's have a great weekend. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Take care. Well, thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to this week's Mortgage Minute. My name is Art Alvarez at MortgageWorks, where we have the answers and they're on the house. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week on our next edition of the Mortgage Minute. So long. Take care.